Sometimes the most unexpected shelter becomes home, and the loneliest heart finds exactly what it's been missing. This is a story about two broken souls who found each other when they'd given up on finding anything at all. Deep in the Wyoming wilderness, a woman running for her life stumbles onto the cabin of a mountain man who hasn't spoken to another person in 15 years. He offers her one night of safety, nothing more. But by morning something has changed. By evening, neither can imagine saying goodbye. What happens when two people who've lost everything discover they might have found each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain had no mercy, and Jonas Mercer preferred it that way. He woke before dawn, as he had every morning for the past 15 years, to a world painted in shades of grey and white. The cabin was cold enough that his breath hung visible in the air, frost coating the inside of the single window like delicate lace. He didn't mind. Cold was honest. Cold didn't lie or make promises it couldn't keep. Jonas swung his legs out of the narrow bed, his feet finding the worn wooden floor by memory rather than sight. 42 years old, and his body still moved with the precision of a man half his age. The wilderness demanded that kind of discipline. Out here in the Wyoming territory, 100 miles from the nearest settlement, weakness meant death. Simple as that. He dressed in layers, wool shirt, buckskin vest, heavy coat. He'd tanned himself from a bull elk 3 winters back. His hands moved through the routine without thought, the same way a man might breathe. Pull on the boots, check the knife at his belt, lift the rifle from its pegs above the door. Every motion measured, practiced, essential. The cabin was small, just one room with a stone hearth at one end and his bed at the other. A rough-hewn table sat in the middle, 2 chairs flanking it, though only one ever saw use. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies he'd gathered or made. Dried meat, preserves in clay jars, traps and snares, ammunition he cast himself. Everything a man needed to survive alone, and nothing more. Well, almost nothing. In the corner, hidden behind a stack of firewood, was a small wooden cross. Jonas had carved it himself from pine, the wood now darkened with age. He never looked at it directly anymore, but he knew it was there. Some ghosts didn't need to be seen to haunt you. He built up the fire from last night's coals, added split wood until flames caught and held. The cabin warmed slowly, reluctantly, the way everything did in these mountains. Jonas set coffee to boil in a battered pot, real coffee, not the chicory substitute some men settled for. It was one of his few luxuries, brought up twice a year by a trapper who knew better than to ask questions or expect conversation. While the coffee heated, Jonas stepped outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath for just a moment. February in the high country, where winter ruled with an iron fist and spring was still a distant promise. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, deeper where the drifts had piled against rocks and trees. The sky above was clear, stars still bright enough to cast shadows, the moon a thin crescent hanging low over the western peaks. Jonas stood on the narrow porch he'd built, taking in the world he'd chosen. His cabin sat in a small clearing, protected on 3 sides by towering pines and a granite ridge that broke the worst of the wind. A creek ran nearby, frozen solid now, but reliable come spring. Game trails crisscrossed, the slopes, deer, elk, sometimes bear. He'd chosen this spot with care 15 years ago, when he'd walked away from everything he'd known and decided to disappear. It had seemed like the right choice, then. Most days, it still did. He checked his trapline as the sun rose, painting the snow pink and gold. 6 traps, spaced over 2 miles of rough terrain. 2 held rabbits, frozen stiff in the night's cold. 1 had a marten, its dark fur valuable if he ever decided to make the journey to town. The others were empty, sprung by some animal clever enough to steal the bait without getting caught. Jonas reset the traps with practiced efficiency, his fingers quick despite the cold. He'd learned trapping from his father, back in Ohio, before the war, before everything. Those skills had kept him alive out here, kept him fed and clothed when other men would have perished. By the time he returned to the cabin, full morning had arrived. Jonas cleaned and dressed his catch, hung the meat to freeze, stretched the marten hide on a frame to cure. His hands moved automatically through tasks he'd done 1,000 times before. There was comfort in the routine, in the predictability of survival. He ate a simple breakfast of fried meat and cornbread left from yesterday's baking, washed down with strong coffee. Then he spent the afternoon mending gear, a torn coat, a broken trap spring, a crack in his snowshoes that needed binding. His hands were never idle. Idle hands led to idle thoughts, and idle thoughts led places he refused to go. But sometimes, despite his best efforts, the memories came anyway. Sarah's laugh, bright as morning sun. Emma's small hand in his, trusting and warm. The farm they'd built together outside Fort Collins, modest but thriving. The plans they'd made, the future they'd imagined, all of it gone in the space of a week when the fever came through. First Emma, burning up despite the cool cloths Sarah pressed to her forehead. Then Sarah herself, 3 days later, her body worn out from nursing their daughter and then succumbing to the same sickness. Jonas had buried them on a hillside, overlooking their land. He'd stood there for hours, or maybe days. Time had lost meaning, trying to understand how the world could simply continue when his entire reason for living had been ripped away. He'd left the farm that same week, walked away from the land, the animals, the life he'd built. He couldn't stay there, couldn't wake up every morning to rooms that echoed with absence. So he'd headed into the mountains with nothing but a rifle, a knife, and a determination to never again care about anything enough to feel that kind of pain. 15 years later, he'd kept that promise. The sun was setting when Jonas heard the first gunshots. He'd been outside, splitting wood for tomorrow's fire, his mind on nothing in particular. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed across the valley, distant but unmistakable. 2 shots, maybe 3, from somewhere down the mountain. Jonas set down his axe and stood perfectly still, listening. The sounds of the wilderness surrounded him, wind in the pines, the creak of branches, a raven calling somewhere, overhead. But no more gunshots. Could be hunters, though it was late in the day for hunting and early in the season for anyone to venture this high. Could be trouble of another sort. Out here, the law was whatever a man made it, and not everyone who came to the mountains did so with honest intentions. Jonas's instincts, honed by years in the cavalry during the war, told him something wasn't right. He went back inside and gathered his gear with deliberate care. Extra ammunition, his pistol, cleaned and loaded, the spyglass he'd kept from his military days. He banked the fire and pulled on his heaviest coat, then stepped back out into the gathering dusk. From the ridge behind his cabin, he had a clear view down the mountain. Jonas climbed to his usual lookout spot, a flat rock sheltered by an overhang, and raised the spyglass to his eye. At first he saw nothing but snow and trees. Then movement caught his attention. A figure, small at this distance, stumbling through the drifts, about a half-mile down the slope. The person was struggling, falling, getting back up. Even from here, Jonas could tell they were in trouble. He tracked the figure's progress for several minutes. Whoever it was seemed to be heading roughly toward his cabin, though they likely had no idea it was there. They were moving like someone at the end of their strength, survival instinct driving them forward when everything else had given up. Jonas lowered the spyglass and weighed his options. He could stay here, do nothing, let nature take its course. That would be the smart choice, the safe choice. Getting involved with other people's troubles had never ended well. But even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't do it, couldn't do it. Whatever else he'd become in his years of isolation, he wasn't the kind of man who could watch another human being die when he had the power to prevent it. Jonas made his way back down to the cabin and waited. The sun had fully set now, darkness falling fast. The way it did in the mountains. He lit a lantern and hung it outside his door, a beacon in the wilderness. Then he loaded his rifle and stood on the porch, watching. Half an hour later, the figure emerged from the tree line and collapsed in the snow 30 yards from his cabin. In the lamplight, Jonas could see it was a woman, her dress torn and dark with what might have been blood. She lay motionless in the snow, and for a moment Jonas thought he'd waited too long. Then she moved, lifting her head, and their eyes met across the distance. Jonas Mercer, who hadn't spoken to another human being in months, who had built his entire life around solitude and silence, made a decision that would change everything. He stepped off the porch and walked toward her through the snow. She was heavier than she looked, dead weight in his arms as Jonas lifted her from the snow. Not unconscious, but close, her eyes fluttered open and closed, her lips moving without sound. He could feel her, shivering even through his coat, her body's desperate attempt to generate warmth it no longer had. Jonas carried her quickly to the cabin and kicked the door shut behind them. The fire had burned low, but the interior was still warm compared to the brutal cold outside. He laid her on his bed, the only bed, and began assessing her condition with the practical efficiency of a man who'd tended wounded soldiers during the war. Her dress was torn in several places, the fabric stiff with frozen blood, a gash on her left arm, deep but not fatal, scrapes on her hands and face. Her feet were wrapped in cloth that had once been part of a petticoat, the makeshift boots soaked through and nearly frozen solid. But the real danger was the cold. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as milk, her breathing shallow. Hypothermia. He'd seen men die from it, watched the cold steal the life from them degree by degree. Jonas worked quickly. He stripped off her wet outer layers, his movements clinical, purposeful. Wrapped her in every blanket he owned, built up the fire until it roared, set water to heat. His hands moved through the tasks automatically, while his mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why in God's name was a woman alone in these mountains in the dead of winter? The gunshots he'd heard earlier took on new meaning. Jonas cleaned and bandaged the wound on her arm, noting that it was relatively fresh hours old, not days. She'd been running, that much was clear, running hard and running scared. He made willow bark tea, strong and bitter, good for pain and fever. When he lifted her head to help her drink, her eyes opened fully for the first time. They were blue, he noticed. The kind of blue that reminded him of summer skies, back when he'd paid attention to such things. She tried to pull away, panic flooding her features. "Easy now," Jonas said, his voice rough from disuse. "You're safe. Just drink this." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, weighing her options. Finally, she drank, grimacing at the bitter taste but getting it down. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonas just nodded and eased her back down onto the pillows. Over the next few hours, he tended to her with quiet competence, changed the bandage on her arm, made sure she stayed warm, gave her more tea and a little broth he'd had simmering. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting to recover from cold and exhaustion. It was near midnight when she finally came fully awake. Jonas was sitting at his table, cleaning his rifle by lamplight, when he heard her move. He looked up to find her sitting up in bed, the blankets pulled tight around her, watching him with wary eyes. "Where am I?" she asked. "My cabin, about 100 miles west of Laramie, up in the Wind River Range." She processed this information, her expression hard to read. "How did I get here?" "You walked. Well, collapsed is more accurate. I carried you the rest of the way. The men, I heard gunshots, saw no one else. Just you." Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by something else. Fear, Jonas realized. Deep, bone-level fear. "They'll keep looking," she said softly. "They won't stop." Jonas set down his rifle and studied her. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s. dark hair that fell past her shoulders, tangled and dirty now. A face that might have been pretty under better circumstances, though it was hard to tell through the bruises and exhaustion. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, intelligent eyes, eyes that had seen too much too quickly. "Who's looking for you?" She hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell a stranger. Jonas waited. He'd learned patience in the mountains, learned that silence was often more effective than questions. "Bounty hunters," she finally said. "Or men pretending to be. I'm wanted for murder back in Missouri." Jonas's expression didn't change. "Did you do it?" "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. "And no, it's complicated." "It usually is." She seemed surprised by his calm response, had probably expected shock or judgment. Jonas had seen too much death, caused too much of it himself during the war, to be shocked by much anymore. "My name is Catherine Williams," she said. "Kate, I was a schoolteacher in Street. Joseph. I worked for the Brennan family, teaching their younger children." She paused, her hands twisting in the blankets. "Their oldest son, Charles. He tried to force himself on me one night. I fought back. He fell, hit his head. He died." Jonas listened without interrupting. "His father is James Brennan, Senator James Brennan, powerful, wealthy, connected." Kate's voice was flat now, reciting facts. "He couldn't accept that his son was the kind of man who would do such a thing. So he made me the villain, had a warrant issued for my arrest. Murder, they called it. Sent men after me." "How long you been running?" 3 weeks. Maybe 4. I've lost track of days." She looked down at her hands. "I've been heading west, trying to disappear. Thought if I could make it to California, maybe I could start over. But they keep finding me. It's like they know where I'm going before I do." Jonas considered this. A senator's resources would be considerable. If he wanted someone found, he could make it happen. "Those men who were shooting at you, they still out there?" "I don't know. I lost them in the dark, in the storm. But they'll pick up my trail come morning." She looked at him, and he saw the exhaustion in every line of her face. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to bring trouble to your door. If you could just let me rest tonight, I'll leave at first light." Jonas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. Snow was falling again, thick and heavy. The temperature would drop below 0 tonight. She wouldn't survive an hour out there in her condition. He turned back to face her. "Storm's coming in, bad one by the look of it. You go out in that, you'll be dead before noon." "I can't stay here. I won't put you in danger." "Bit late for that," Jonas said dryly. "You're already here." Kate started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're going to stay here tonight, get some rest, let your body recover. Come morning, if the weather breaks, you can leave. If it doesn't, you stay until it does. Those are the terms, non-negotiable. I don't even know your name." "Jonas Mercer." "Mr. Mercer. I appreciate. Just Jonas. And I'm not doing this for appreciation. I'm doing it because leaving you to die in the snow doesn't sit right with me." He moved back to his chair and picked up his rifle again. "Now get some sleep. I'll keep watch." Kate studied him for a long moment, this mountain man who'd taken her in without hesitation, who seemed utterly unafraid of the trouble she'd brought. She wanted to ask him why he was alone out here, what had driven him to this isolated existence. But exhaustion was pulling at her, and the bed was warm, and for the first time in weeks she felt something close to safe. "Thank you, Jonas," she said softly. He didn't look up from his rifle. "One night. That's all I'm offering. One night," she agreed. But as Kate drifted off to sleep and Jonas sat in the lamplight, both of them knew that one night might not be enough. The storm outside was building, wind howling around the cabin like a living thing. And somewhere in those mountains, men with guns and cold purpose were waiting for dawn. Jonas checked his ammunition and settled in for a long night. He'd protected his solitude fiercely for 15 years, built walls around his heart that nothing could penetrate. But now there was a woman sleeping in his bed, danger circling in the darkness, and something stirring in his chest that felt dangerously close to caring. He told himself it was just one night. Come morning, she'd leave, and his life would return to the way it was meant to be. But the mountains, as always, had their own plans. 2 weeks had passed since Kate first stumbled into Jonas's world, and the cabin no longer felt like his alone. Her presence had woven itself into every corner, the quilt growing larger each evening, her dress hanging beside his coat, the way she hummed while working, the sound of her laughter when he said something unexpectedly dry and funny. Jonas tried not to think too hard about how natural it all felt. The weather had cleared enough for travel, but neither of them mentioned it. Instead, they fell deeper into their shared routine. Jonas continued teaching Kate wilderness skills with an intensity that surprised them both. She learned to set snares, to skin and dress game, to read the mountain's moods in the behavior of animals and the quality of the air. She was a quick study, fearless in a way that earned his respect. When he taught her to gut a deer, she didn't flinch from the blood. When he showed her how to cross an ice-covered stream, she followed his exact footsteps without hesitation. And when he handed her his knife and told her to defend herself, she held it with the grip of someone willing to use it. "You're not squeamish," he observed one afternoon as they worked together to smoke a haunch of venison. "Can't afford to be." "Not anymore." Kate adjusted the meat on the rack, checking the temperature of the smoke with her hand the way he'd shown her. "I was raised to be a lady, Jonas, proper and refined. But being proper doesn't keep you alive in the wilderness. You're doing good, better than most men I've known." The compliment, simple as it was, brought color to her cheeks. They'd begun working together on expanding Jonas's food stores, preparing for the next winter, a fact that didn't escape either of them. Planning for next winter meant Kate would be here for it. Meant this arrangement was becoming something more permanent than either had intended. One evening, as they worked side by side repairing a section of the cabin's roof where winter had damaged the shingles, Jonas found himself talking about things he hadn't spoken of in years. The farm he'd built with Sarah, the dreams they'd had for Emma's future, the way the morning light used to hit the kitchen window just right. Kate listened without interrupting, occasionally asking gentle questions that showed she understood the weight of what he was sharing. "What about you?" Jonas asked as they climbed down from the roof, the work complete. "Before all this, what did you dream about?" Kate was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I wanted my own school, a real one, not just tutoring for wealthy families. A place where any child could come to learn, regardless of whether their parents could pay." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I wanted to make a difference, wanted to matter. You would have been good at it, would have been," she echoed. "Strange how quickly Wilby becomes, would have been." That night, as they sat by the fire, Kate stitching her quilt while Jonas carved a new handle for a broken tool, she looked up and asked, "What if I didn't leave at all?" Jonas's hands stilled on the wood. "You're already staying. I mean permanently. What if I stayed here, with you, and made this my home?" The question hung in the air between them, too large to ignore and too complicated to answer simply. Jonas set down his carving. "Kate, this isn't a life. This is survival. There's a difference." "Is there? Because it feels more like living than anything I did back in Missouri. You say that now, but you don't know what you're asking. Winter up here, real winter, is brutal. We're barely into spring. Come December, when we haven't seen another soul in months, when the snow is 8 feet deep and the temperature drops so low the air hurts to breathe, that's when the loneliness sets in. That's when people break. I'm not afraid of loneliness. I'm afraid of going back to a world where I have to look over my shoulder every day, where I can never feel safe." Kate set aside her quilting and moved closer. "With you, I feel safe. I feel like myself." Jonas stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "You feel that way because I'm the first person who's helped you since this all started. But I'm not. I can't be. Can't be what? Can't be what you need." The words came out harsh, defensive. "I'm a broken man living in exile. I've got nothing to offer except cold and solitude and memories I can't shake." "That's not true." "It is true. Sarah and Emma," his voice cracked on their names. "They deserved better than what I gave them. Deserved a man who could protect them, who could keep them safe. I failed them." Kate crossed to him, her expression fierce. "They died. Of fever, Jonas. Not neglect. Not your failure. An illness you couldn't have prevented or cured. I should have. Should have what? Been a doctor? Controlled the weather? Stopped fate itself?" She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "You're punishing yourself. For being human. For not being God." Jonas wanted to pull away, but he couldn't. Her hand was warm against his chest, her eyes too understanding, her presence too real. "I won't survive losing someone again," he said quietly. "That's the truth of it. I won't survive it." "Then don't lose me. Let me stay." For a long moment, they stood there, close enough that Jonas could count the flecks of gold in her blue eyes, close enough that he could feel the rise and fall of her breathing, close enough that all he had to do was lean in, and he stepped back, breaking the moment. "You should get some rest. We're checking the far trapline tomorrow." Kate's expression showed hurt, but she nodded and moved toward the bed. At the doorway, she paused. "Jonas, I know you're scared, but so am I. The difference is, I'm more scared of leaving than I am of staying." She disappeared into the small alcove where the bed was, leaving Jonas alone by the fire. He sat there for hours, staring into the flames, his mind at war with itself. Every logical part of him said this was temporary, that Kate would eventually leave by choice or by necessity, and he'd be alone again. The smart thing would be to maintain his distance, to keep the walls up, to protect what was left of his battered heart. But there was another part of him, smaller but growing stronger, that wanted to believe. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to risk caring about someone again. That maybe Kate was right, and staying was worth the fear. The fire burned down to coals, and still Jonas sat there, caught between the life he'd built and the one that was trying to take shape around him. In the darkness of the alcove, Kate lay awake too, her hand clutching the silver locket she wore, a gift from her mother, the only thing she'd managed to keep through all her running. Inside was a small portrait, faded but precious. She understood Jonas's fear because she felt it too. But she also understood something he didn't seem to grasp yet. Fear of loss was no way to live. Eventually, you had to choose between protecting yourself from pain and allowing yourself to feel anything at all. Kate had made her choice. Now, she could only wait for Jonas to make his. Morning brought an uneasy truce. Neither spoke of the previous night's conversation, but it hung between them like morning mist, visible but ungraspable. Jonas was preparing to check his trapline alone when Kate emerged from the cabin, already dressed in the heavy clothes he'd modified for her from his own spare gear. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jonas considered protesting, but something in her expression told him it would be pointless. Besides, she'd proven herself capable over the past weeks. And if he was being honest, he'd come to appreciate her company, even when words weren't necessary. They set out in silence, following the route Jonas had walked 100 times before. The morning was clear but cold, the kind of cold that made every breath visible and turned exposed skin numb in minutes. Kate kept pace without complaint, her movements more confident now, more sure of the terrain. The first 3 traps held nothing. The 4th had caught a decent-sized rabbit. As Jonas worked to reset it, Kate surveyed their surroundings with the vigilance he'd taught her, always watching, always aware. It was she who noticed the tracks. "Jonas," she said quietly. Look. He followed her gaze to a patch of disturbed snow about 30 yards off the trail. Fresh tracks, large and numerous. His gut tightened with recognition even before he moved closer to examine them. Wolves, pack, by the number of prints, and recent made within the last few hours. We should head back, Kate said, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. Agreed. They'd gone perhaps a mile when Jonas heard it, a low growl that raised the hair on the back of his neck. He raised his hand, stopping Kate in her tracks. She understood immediately, her hand moving to the pistol at her belt. The wolves emerged from the tree line like grey ghosts. 5 of them, lean and hungry, their winter coats rough with the lean months. The alpha, a scarred male missing half an ear, stood at the front, his yellow eyes fixed on Jonas and Kate with calculated interest. Easy, Jonas murmured, bringing his rifle to his shoulder, but not yet aiming. Back up slowly. Don't run. They retreated step by careful step, but the wolves advanced to match, maintaining the distance. Hunting behavior. The pack was testing them, looking for weakness, deciding whether 2 humans were worth the risk. The answer came when a younger wolf, overeager, broke from the pack and lunged. Jonas's rifle cracked, the shot true. The young wolf dropped, and chaos erupted. The pack attacked from multiple angles, their strategy clear, separate, and overwhelm. Jonas fired again, taking down a second wolf, but the others were fast, frighteningly fast. He was reaching for his pistol when he heard Kate's gun discharge beside him. A third wolf fell, mid-leap, Kate's bullet catching it square in the chest. The tree line! Jonas shouted, back to back! They moved as one, covering each other, their training clicking into place like it had been practiced for years rather than weeks. Jonas fired, reloaded, fired again. Kate matched his rhythm, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. The alpha circled, wary now, recognizing that these humans were more dangerous than anticipated. But he was hungry, and hunger made creatures desperate. He feinted left, then attacked from the right, going for Jonas's exposed flank. Kate saw it first. She pivoted, putting herself between Jonas and the wolf, and fired. The shot went wide. She was moving too fast, but it was enough to make the alpha falter. Jonas didn't waste the opening. His bullet caught the alpha in the head, and the great wolf dropped like a stone. The remaining wolf, younger and less committed, bolted into the forest. For a long moment, Jonas and Kate stood in the sudden silence, breathing hard, weapons still raised. Then, as if a string had been cut, Kate began to shake. Jonas caught her before her knees gave out, his arms steady around her. "You're all right," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "You did good. Better than good. I thought when he came at you, I thought, I know, but you didn't freeze. You acted. You saved my life." Kate looked up at him, her eyes wide. "You would have done the same for me." "Yes," Jonas said simply. "I would have." The walk back to the cabin was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Something had shifted between them during the attack, some unspoken understanding that went beyond words. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Kate finally broke the silence. "You asked me once what I was afraid of," she said. "I thought I was afraid of being caught, of being dragged back to face charges for something I didn't do. But today, when that wolf came at you, I realized what I'm really afraid of. What's that? Losing you, losing this." She gestured around the cabin. "I know you think I'm just running from my old life, that eventually I'll want to go back to civilization, but you're wrong. This us, it's not a consolation prize. It's what I want." Jonas stared into the fire, weighing his next words carefully. "When Sarah died, I promised myself I'd never care about anyone again. Seemed like the only way to survive. And now I'm realizing that survival and living aren't the same thing." He looked at her finally, letting her see the conflict in his eyes. "You scare me, Kate." Not because of the danger you bring, but because you make me want things I thought I'd buried with my family." Kate moved closer, closing the distance between them. "What kind of things?" "A future. A reason to wake up that's more than just habit. Someone to—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "Someone to what?" "Someone to love," he finished quietly. Kate reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his bearded cheek. Would that be so terrible? Jonas covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. For 15 years, he'd kept himself isolated, safe behind walls of solitude and silence. But Kate had found the cracks in those walls, had slipped through his defenses with her quiet strength and stubborn courage. "It would be terrifying," he admitted. "Good," Kate said softly, "because I'm terrified too." And then, finally, Jonas let himself do what he'd been wanting to do for days. He leaned in and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. Her arms went around his neck, and his pulled her close, and for the first time in 15 years, Jonas Mercer allowed himself to feel something other than grief. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Don't know how to let someone in again. We'll figure it out together," Kate promised. "One day at a time." That night, they fell asleep by the fire, Kate's head on Jonas's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The cabin was warm, the world outside cold and dark, but inside, something new was beginning to grow, something that looked a lot like hope. 3 days after the wolf attack, Jonas was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard Kate call out from inside. Her voice carried an edge of urgency that sent him running, axe still in hand. He found her standing at the window, pointing toward the tree line. "There's someone coming." On horseback. Jonas moved to her side and followed her gaze. A lone rider was making his way up the mountain, the horse moving slowly, almost stumbling. Even from this distance, Jonas could tell something was wrong. The rider swayed in the saddle, barely keeping his seat. "Get inside and stay there," Jonas said, reaching for his rifle. "Could be a trap." But as the rider drew closer, Jonas could see it wasn't a trap, it was a man barely clinging to life. He collapsed from the horse 30 feet from the cabin, hitting the snow hard and not moving. Jonas approached cautiously, rifle ready, while Kate watched from the window. The horse stood nearby, exhausted, its flanks heaving. Jonas reached the man and rolled him over carefully. He was young, maybe 30, dressed in a heavy coat that was soaked with blood. His face was pale, his breathing shallow and labored. A gunshot wound, Jonas realized, probably 2 or 3 days old based on the infection. He could smell even through the cold. "Kate," Jonas called, "I need your help." Together, they carried the man inside and laid him on the bed. His eyes fluttered open as they worked to remove his coat, revealing a bloody shirt beneath and a deputy marshal's badge pinned to his vest. Kate froze when she saw the badge, her face going pale. "Easy," Jonas told the marshal. "We're going to help you." The man's hand shot out, grabbing Jonas's wrist with surprising strength. "Catherine Williams," he gasped. Is she here?" Jonas and Kate exchanged a look. "I'm here," Kate said, stepping forward despite her obvious fear. "How did you know?" "Been tracking you." The marshal managed, each word clearly costing him. "Not to arrest, to help, but they found me first." Jonas cut away the man's shirt, revealing 2 bullet wounds, one in the shoulder, one in the side. Both were infected, the flesh around them red and swollen. Without proper medical care, this man had maybe hours left. "Who shot you?" Jonas asked, beginning to clean the wounds with whiskey, knowing it was probably futile but trying anyway. "Senator's men. They're not bounty hunters. They're assassins." The marshal coughed, blood flecking his lips. Need to tell you." "Don't talk," Kate said, her voice shaking. "Save your strength." But the marshal shook his head. "No time. Listen. He fumbled at his coat, pulling out a leather journal from an inner pocket. "It's all in here. The truth." Jonas took the journal and opened it, reading quickly. What he found made his blood run cold. The journal belonged to Deputy Marshal William Garrett, and it detailed months of investigation into Senator James Brennan. Kate's employer, or rather, her former employer, wasn't just a wealthy man protecting his son's reputation. He was involved in a massive corruption scheme involving land fraud, bribery, and intimidation. Federal lands were being sold illegally to railroad companies, with Brennan taking substantial payments to look the other way and use his influence to smooth over any investigations. Charles Brennan, the senator's son who had attacked Kate, had been involved too. More than that, he'd been the one collecting the bribes, moving the money. Kate had witnessed one such exchange without understanding what she'd seen, had walked in on Charles meeting with a railroad executive, taking an envelope full of cash. Charles had attacked her not out of simple brutality, but to silence her. And when he died in the struggle, the senator had seen an opportunity to eliminate a witness and protect his conspiracy at the same time. "You were never being hunted for murder," Jonas said to Kate, his voice tight. "You were being hunted because you could expose his corruption." "I didn't even know what I saw," Kate whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "I thought it was just his allowance or something. I didn't ask questions." Marshal Garrett coughed again. "Worse this time. The men coming for you, they're not lawmen. Victor Kane leads them, former Confederate guerrilla, killer." He grabbed Kate's hand. "Evidence in the journal. Names, dates, amounts. Get it to Fort Laramie. Marshal Thompson, he's clean. He'll protect you. He'll—" The marshal's words cut off as another coughing fit overtook him. Jonas could see the life draining from him, could see the moment when fighting stopped being possible. "How far behind are they?" Jonas asked urgently. "Kane and his men, how close?" 3 days, maybe 4. I tried to lead them away, but Garrett's eyes found Kate's. "I'm sorry. Sorry I couldn't protect you better." "You came all this way to warn me," Kate said, tears streaming down her face. "That's more than anyone else has done. Your father, he was good man. Taught with him before he died. Promised him." Garrett's breathing was becoming labored, each breath a struggle. "Promised I'd look after his girl if anything. Happened. Failed him. Failed you." "No," Kate said firmly. "You didn't fail. You found me. You're giving me a chance." Garrett managed a weak smile. "Get to Fort Laramie. Clear your name. Make them pay." They were his last words. The marshal died quietly, his hand still holding Kate's, his duty finally complete. Jonas closed the man's eyes and stood, his mind already racing through their options. Kate remained by the bed, crying silently for a man she'd barely known who had died trying to save her. After a moment, Jonas moved to the window and scanned the horizon. Somewhere out there, men were coming. Professional killers with orders to eliminate Kate and anyone helping her. They had maybe 4 days' head start, possibly less if Kane was as good as Garrett had suggested. "Kate," Jonas said gently, "we need to talk." She wiped her eyes and joined him. Together, they examined the journal more carefully, reading through page after page of meticulous notes. Garrett had documented everything. Payments, dates, meetings, witnesses. It was enough to bring down the senator and half his associates, but only if they could get it to someone trustworthy. "Fort Laramie," Kate said. "That's where we need to go. That's 12 days' journey from here, hard travel, through rough country. And we'd have to assume Kane will be tracking us the whole way. You don't have to come. This isn't your fight." Jonas looked at her, this woman who had stumbled into his life and somehow become essential to it. "The hell it isn't. You think I'm going to let you face this alone? Jonas, these are killers. If they catch us, they won't." His voice was hard, certain. "I spent 4 years staying alive in the war, Kate. Fought guerrillas just like Kane. I know how they think, how they move. We can do this." Kate searched his face. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We'll get you to Fort Laramie. We'll clear your name. And then what? And then we come back here, and we build the life we talked about. The one where you don't have to run anymore." Kate wrapped her arms around him, holding tight. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we both survive this. Both of us, Jonas. I'm not losing you." Jonas thought about the journal, about the men coming for them, about the 12 days of dangerous travel ahead. He thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons he should tell Kate the truth, that he couldn't promise they'd both survive, that going up against men like Victor Kane was a risk that might cost them everything. But when he looked into her eyes, he made the promise anyway. "We both survive," he said. "I give you my word." They spent the next few hours preparing. Jonas buried Marshal Garrett in a spot overlooking the valley, marking the grave with a simple cross. They packed light weapons, ammunition, dried food, the journal wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from water, everything they'd need to move fast and stay alive. That night, as they made final preparations, Kate showed Jonas the silver locket she always wore. Inside was a small portrait of a woman with kind eyes. "My mother," Kate explained. "She died when I was 12. My father gave me this, told me to keep her close to my heart." She closed the locket carefully. "I think she'd have liked you." "I know Sarah would have liked you," Jonas replied, surprising himself with the admission. He pulled out the ring he'd carried for 15 years, the one he'd given Kate weeks ago by the fire. "This was hers. I want you to keep it, not as a replacement but as a promise. We get through this, Kate, and I'm going to marry you proper. Make this official." Kate's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I'd like that." They held each other as the fire burned low, drawing strength from their closeness. Tomorrow they'd leave the only safety Kate had, known since her nightmare began. They'd head into danger with killers on their trail and only each other to rely on. But tonight they had this moment, and somehow that was enough. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that promised harsh travel ahead. Jonas woke Kate before first light, and they moved through their final preparations with quiet efficiency. Every item was considered, weighed against its usefulness. They could carry only what was essential. Too much weight would slow them down, and speed might be the difference between life and death. Jonas had spent half the night creating a detailed plan, drawing maps from memory of the route to Fort Laramie. He knew the terrain well enough from his years in the mountains, and his military training had taught him to think strategically about movement and defense. "We'll avoid the main trails," he explained to Kate as they studied his hand-drawn map by lamplight. "Kane will expect us to take the fastest route. Instead, we go through the high passes. Harder travel, but less predictable." Kate traced the route with her finger, noting the markers Jonas had drawn. "This adds at least 3 days to the journey." 4, probably. "But it gives us better defensive positions if we're caught, and it forces Kane to spread his men thin if he wants to cover all possible routes." "You've done this before. Planned routes, avoided pursuit." Jonas nodded. "During the war, my unit specialized in reconnaissance behind enemy lines. We learned to move without being seen, to think like the men hunting us. Kane was a guerrilla fighter, I know his type. They're good, but they rely on fear and overwhelming force. Take away those advantages, and they're just men." Kate absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. "Teach me everything you know about staying alive out there." So Jonas did. As they made their final preparations, he shared hard-won lessons from the war. How to move without leaving obvious tracks, how to duck, read the land for natural cover, how to stay alert without exhausting yourself, how to think 3 moves ahead, always planning for the worst possibility. "If we get separated," Jonas said, his voice serious, "you keep moving toward Fort Laramie. Don't come back for me. Don't wait. Just get that journal to Marshal Thompson." "Jonas, promise me, Kate. This is bigger than either of us." That journal is the only thing that can clear your name and bring down Brennan. It has to reach Fort Laramie, no matter what." Kate's jaw set stubbornly. "I'm not leaving you behind. You might not have a choice. Then you better make sure I don't have to make that decision." Before leaving, Jonas did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He took the small wooden cross from its hiding place in the corner and held it for a long moment, running his thumb over the carved names. Sarah, Emma. Then he wrapped it carefully and placed it in his pack. Kate watched but didn't ask. She understood that he was bringing his past with him, making peace with it in whatever way he could. They set fire to the cabin just before dawn. Jonas poured lamp oil across the floor, lit a torch, and tossed it through the doorway. The structure caught quickly, flames climbing the walls, consuming the shelter that had been his sanctuary for 15 years. "Are you sure?" Kate asked, watching the fire grow. "They'll come here looking for us. This way they waste time searching through the ashes, trying to figure out if we died in the fire or escaped. Buys us maybe half a day." As they walked away from the burning cabin, Jonas didn't look back. That life was over. Whatever came next, it would be different. It had to be. The first 3 days of travel were brutal but uneventful. They moved through high country where the snow still lay deep, following game trails and creek beds, avoiding anywhere a man on horseback might easily travel. Jonas set a punishing pace, and Kate kept up without complaint, though he could see the exhaustion in her face each evening when they made camp. They slept in shifts, never both at the same time, built no fires that might give away their position, ate cold food and melted snow for water. It was miserable, uncomfortable travel, but Jonas knew it was necessary. Every hour they stayed ahead of Cain was an hour closer to safety. On the 4th day, they found signs that they were being followed. Jonas spotted it first, a disturbance in the snow on a ridge above their position. Someone had stood there recently, watching the valley below. The same valley they'd crossed that morning. "How close?" Kate asked, her hand instinctively moving to her pistol. Jonas studied the tracks carefully. "These are from yesterday, maybe the day before. They're behind us, but not by much." They increased their pace, moving faster despite the rough terrain. That night, they camped in a narrow canyon with only one approach, a spot Jonas could defend if necessary. He took first watch while Kate tried to sleep, though he could tell from her breathing that rest wasn't coming easily. She said finally, giving up on sleep, "Tell me about after, when this is over." Jonas kept his eyes on the darkness beyond their small camp. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. The ranch you mentioned. What would it look like?" He smiled slightly, allowing himself to imagine it. "Small place, maybe 100 acres near Cheyenne. Close enough to town for supplies and company, far enough out for peace. A proper house, not a cabin. 2 stories, with windows that actually let in light. A barn for horses, a chicken coop, maybe some cattle. And the school I talked about? You'd open it in town. I'd build the benches and desks myself. Make sure every child had a slate and chalk, books to read. You'd teach them reading and arithmetic and whatever else you thought they needed to know." Kate moved closer, sitting beside him in the odor. "Darkness. You've thought about this. More than I probably should, given where we are. I like that you've thought about it. Makes it feel real." Jonas turned to look at her, this woman who had somehow become his entire future. "It will be real, Kate. I promise you that." On the 7th day, they descended from the high country and entered a region of dense forest and rocky ravines. The travel was easier here, but Jonas felt increasingly uneasy. They were getting close to areas where people lived, where Cain could have eyes watching for them. That afternoon, they stopped at a stream to refill their water skins. Kate was crouched by the water when Jonas heard it, the soft sound of a horse's bridle, maybe 200 yards away. He grabbed Kate's arm and pulled her into thick brush, his hand over her mouth. She understood immediately, going perfectly still. Through gaps in the foliage, Jonas watched as 3 riders passed along a nearby trail. They were armed, moving slowly, clearly searching for something, or someone. One of them was a tall man with a scar running down the left side of his face, his eyes cold and calculating. Jonas recognized the type immediately, a killer who'd made murder his profession, Victor Kane. The riders passed without seeing them, but Jonas's blood had gone cold. Kane wasn't behind them anymore. He'd gotten ahead, was setting up ambush points along the likely routes to Fort Laramie. "We need to change our approach," Jonas whispered once the riders were out of earshot. "Kane's smart. He's not chasing us, he's herding us. What do we do?" Jonas pulled out his map and studied it, thinking through their options. Every direct route to Fort Laramie would take them through areas where Kane could set up ambushes. But there was one possibility, a route so difficult and dangerous that no one would expect them to take it. "We go through Devil's Pass," Jonas said finally. Kate's eyes widened. She'd heard of devils. Pass everyone in the territory had. A narrow canyon with walls so steep they blocked the sun, prone to rock slides, haunted by stories of people who'd gone in and never come out. "That's suicide," she said. "Maybe, but it's also our best chance. Kane won't expect it, won't have men positioned there. If we can make it through, we come out less than 2 days from Fort Laramie with nothing between us and safety. And if we can't make it through," Jonas met her eyes, "then at least we'll die trying on our own terms." Kate was quiet for a long moment, weighing the options. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Devil's Pass it is." They changed course immediately, heading southwest toward the infamous canyon. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to lead their borrowed horse through areas where riding was impossible. By nightfall, they could see the dark slash in the mountains that marked the entrance to Devil's Pass. That night, they made camp one last time before entering the canyon. Jonas gave Kate his first wife's ring formally, slipping it onto her finger with hands that were surprisingly steady. "When we get through this," he said, "I'm going to marry you proper, with a preacher and witnesses and everything legal." "I'll hold you to that," Kate replied, then kissed him with a fierceness that spoke of hope and fear in equal measure. They fell asleep in each other's arms, drawing warmth and comfort from their closeness. Tomorrow they'd enter Devil's Pass and gamble everything on one dangerous journey through the mountains. But tonight, they had this moment, and in the face of everything they'd survived and everything still to come, that was more than enough. Jonas woke once in the darkness, his soldier's instincts alert to some sound or movement he couldn't quite identify. He lay still, listening, but heard only the wind in the trees and Kate's soft breathing beside him. Still, the feeling persisted. The sense that they were being watched, that danger was closer than he'd thought. He didn't sleep again that night, keeping watch over Kate and their small camp, his rifle across his knees, and his mind running through scenarios and strategies. By morning, he'd made peace with what was coming. Whatever happened in that canyon, whatever they faced in the days ahead, he wouldn't let Kate face it alone. They'd survive together or fall together. But either way, they'd face it as one. They made it another mile before Jonas's strength gave out. Every step had been agony, every movement of his broken leg sending waves of pain through his body that threatened to drag him under. But Kate had been there, supporting him, refusing to let him fall. Now, as they emerged from the narrowest part of Devil's Pass into a wider section where ancient rockfalls had created a maze of boulders, Jonas knew they couldn't go any further. "Not like this." "Kate," he said, his voice tight with pain, "we need to stop, need to rest." She helped him down behind a peat, large boulder that offered cover from the trail behind them. His face was grey, sweat beading his forehead despite the cold. The splint on his leg was soaked through with blood. "How bad?" Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. "Bad enough." Jonas checked his rifle, counting ammunition. "They're close now. Maybe an hour behind, maybe less." Kate looked back the way they'd come, her mind racing. They were still a day from Fort Laramie, maybe more at the pace Jonas could manage. Kane would catch them long before that, which meant We make our stand here, Jonas said, reading her thoughts. This position is defensible. High ground, good cover, limited approaches. If we're smart, we might be able to hold them off. Or we die trying. That's always been a possibility, Kate. At least here, we choose the ground. He pulled the journal from his pack and held it out to her. But you don't have to stay. Take this, take the horse, and go. You can still make it. Kate's answer was to check her pistol, then position herself behind an adjacent boulder with a clear line of sight down the trail. I said I wasn't leaving you, she stated calmly. I meant it. Jonas felt a surge of emotion so strong it almost overwhelmed him. Love, certainly, but also pride and gratitude, and something close to awe at the strength of this woman who'd walked into his life and changed everything. Then we do this together, he said. One last fight. They didn't have to wait long. 6 men appeared on the trail, moving cautiously through the boulder field. Victor Kane rode at their head, his scarred face alert, his hand resting on his pistol. These were hard men, killers who'd made their living through violence. They moved with the confidence of people who'd never lost a fight. Jonas let them get close enough that his first shot wouldn't miss. His rifle cracked, sharp and clear in the canyon air. One of Kane's men dropped, dead, before he hit the ground. Chaos erupted. The riders scattered, seeking cover, returning fire. But Jonas had chosen his position well. The boulders forced Kane's men to approach from predictable angles, limited their ability to use their numerical advantage. Kate fired, her bullet catching a second man in the shoulder, spinning him around. Jonas took him down with a follow-up shot. 4 men left, including Kane. They're better than the bounty hunters, Kate observed, reloading quickly. They're soldiers. We're soldiers anyway. They know what they're doing. Kane called out from behind cover. Mercer! I know you're hit, saw the blood trail. This doesn't have to end with everyone dead. Give us the woman and the journal, and you can walk away. That's not happening, Jonas shouted back. Be reasonable. You're outnumbered, wounded, and we have all day. Your woman's pretty, though. Might keep her alive for a while. Let her enjoy her last hours. Kate's face hardened with rage, but Jonas laid a hand on her arm. He's trying to make us angry, make us do something stupid. It's working. A bullet ricocheted off the rock near Jonas's head, chips of stone stinging his face. Kane's men were trying to flank them, using the boulder field for cover as they worked their way around to better positions. They're moving right, Kate said. I can see 2 of them. Take the shot if you have it. Kate aimed carefully, waiting for her moment. When one of the men exposed himself for just a second, she fired. The bullet took him in the chest, and he went down hard. 3 left. But Jonas could feel his strength fading. The blood loss, the pain, the sheer effort of staying conscious, it was all taking its toll. His hands shook as he reloaded his rifle. Kate saw it and made a decision. She pulled out the marshal's journal and held it up where Kane could see it. This is what you want, right? She called out. All the evidence against Senator Brennan, everything that could destroy him. Kate, what are you doing? Jonas hissed. Saving your life. She looked at him, her eyes fierce. I love you, Jonas Mercer, and I'm not letting you die for me. She stood, holding the journal, exposing herself. Here's my offer, Kane, she shouted. I'll give you the journal and come quietly, but you let him go. You leave him here, alive, and you don't come back. Those are my terms. No deal, Jonas said, trying to rise despite his injury. Kate, no. But Kane was considering it. He'd lost 3 men already, and Jonas was proving harder to kill than expected. Taking Kate and the journal would accomplish his mission. The wounded mountain man would probably die anyway, alone in the wilderness. Throw down your weapons, Kane called out. Both of you. Then walk down here where I can see you. Kate looked at Jonas one last time, memorizing his face. I'm sorry, she whispered, but I'd rather die knowing you'll live. She tossed her pistol down and started forward. And Jonas, watching the woman he loved walk toward certain death, made his own decision. He pulled out the emergency flare he'd been saving, a signal device from his cavalry days, lit it, sent it arcing into the sky, where it burst in brilliant red light. Then he grabbed his rifle, ignored the screaming pain in his leg, and charged. What happened next would forever remain fragmented in Jonas's memory, a series of moments rather than a coherent whole. He remembered Kate screaming his name as he stumbled forward, his broken leg threatening to collapse under him with every step. He remembered firing his rifle, seeing one of Kane's remaining men go down. He remembered Kane himself, turning toward him with cold fury in his eyes. He remembered the sound of gunfire, so much gunfire, and wondering whose bullets were finding their marks. What he didn't remember, what he'd only learn later, was that his signal flare had been seen by a cavalry patrol from Fort Laramie, out on routine reconnaissance in the territory. 30 soldiers, commanded by a young lieutenant who'd recognized a military distress signal and decided to investigate. They'd arrived at full gallop just as Kane raised his pistol toward Kate. The fight that followed was brief and brutal. Kane's remaining men, already bloodied and outnumbered, faced trained cavalry soldiers with no mercy for assassins. 2 surrendered immediately. The third tried to fight and was cut down. Victor Kane himself was shot twice by the cavalry lieutenant as he tried to use Kate as a shield. He fell into the dust, his killing days finally over. Jonas remembered collapsing. Remembered Kate's face above his, her hands pressing against his leg wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Remembered her voice, fierce and determined, telling him to stay awake, to stay with her, promising him that ranch and that school and that future they'd planned. Then darkness claimed him, and he remembered nothing more. He woke 3 days later in a hospital bed at Fort Laramie. His leg was splintered properly now, the bone set by an actual doctor. Kate sat beside his bed, her head resting on the mattress, asleep with her hand holding his. "Kate," he whispered, his throat raw. She jerked awake, and when she saw his eyes open, she burst into tears. "You stubborn, foolish, wonderful man, you nearly died." "But I didn't." "No, you didn't. Neither of us did." Over the following days, as Jonas slowly recovered his strength, Kate filled him in on everything that had happened. Marshal Thompson had personally taken custody of Garrett's journal. The evidence was being reviewed by federal prosecutors. Senator Brennan had been arrested, along with half a dozen associates. Kate's murder charge had been formally dismissed, her name cleared. Victor Kane had survived his wounds, barely, and was singing like a canary to save his own neck. Every detail of Brennan's conspiracy was coming to light. Justice, slow but inevitable, was finally arriving. "You're free," Jonas said, squeezing Kate's hand. "Truly free." "We're free," she corrected. "Both of us." The doctors warned that Jonas's leg would never fully heal, that he'd walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Jonas didn't care. He could walk, could work, could build the future he'd promised Kate. That was enough. 6 months later, on a bright October morning, Jonas and Kate stood on the porch of their new home, a modest ranch house on 100 acres outside Cheyenne, exactly as Jonas had described. The structure was simple but solid, built with Jonas's own hands over the summer months, with Kate working beside him every day. The land spread out before them, beautiful in its autumn colors. A small herd of cattle grazed in the distance. The barn they'd raised together stood proud against the sky. And in the town, just a few miles down the road, Kate's school was scheduled to open in the spring. Marshal Thompson had been their witness when they married in a small ceremony at Fort Laramie, Kate wearing a simple dress and Jonas in his best shirt, both of them grinning like fools as they exchanged vows. Thompson had become a friend, visiting occasionally to check on them and share news of Brennan's ongoing trial. Now, as they stood together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Jonas felt something he'd thought was lost forever: peace. Not the numb absence of feeling he'd cultivated in his isolated cabin, but genuine peace that came from being exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly who he was meant to be with. "Do you ever miss it?" Kate asked softly. "The cabin? The solitude?" Jonas considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity. Life was uncomplicated up there. But no, I don't miss it. This," he gestured at their home, their land, "this is better. This is living, not just surviving." Kate leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad, because I'm never letting you be alone again." They stood there as evening deepened, comfortable in the silence, until Kate spoke again. "Jonas, there's something I need to tell you." Something in her tone made him look down at her. She was smiling, nervous and excited at once. "I saw the doctor in town yesterday, just to confirm what I suspected." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby. In the spring, around the time the school opens." Jonas felt the world tilt, emotions flooding through him so powerful he couldn't name them all. Joy, certainly. Fear, absolutely. But underneath it all, hope, brilliant and unshakable. "A baby," he repeated, his voice rough with feeling. "Are you happy?" Jonas pulled her close, holding her with a gentleness that belied his size. "I'm terrified," he admitted, "but yes, Kate, I'm happy. I'm more than happy." They stayed like that as stars began to appear overhead, the same stars Jonas had watched from his lonely cabin, now viewed from a place of warmth and connection. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, Kate's desperate flight, his reluctant hospitality, the danger they'd faced, the promises they'd made. "Survive one night and go," he murmured, remembering his words from what seemed like a lifetime ago. Kate smiled against his chest. "I stayed forever instead." "I'm glad you did." Inside their home, the lanterns they'd lit cast warm light through the windows. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges. The ranch wouldn't run itself, and there was still much to build before winter. But tonight, they had this moment. Two broken souls who'd found each other in the wilderness. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the most unexpected shelter becomes home, and the loneliest heart finds exactly what it's been missing. As they walked back inside together, Jonas's hand never leaving Kate's, he thought about Marshall Garrett, who died protecting Kate, about Sarah and Emma, who he'd loved and lost, about the years of isolation and grief. And he realized that all of it, every painful step, every loss, every moment of darkness, had led him here. To this woman, this life, this second chance at joy. The past would always be part of him. But now, finally, it didn't define him. Now he had a future, and it was more beautiful than anything he'd dared to dream.